During World War I, Sigmund Freud theorized that deep down, humans are irrational. Watching the terrors that humans enacted on their fellow men on the battlefield, he observed that, under dire enough circumstances, humans could lose their sense of civilized rationality and move towards something much more sinister. While Freud was wrong about a lot of things, and I could insert like a million Oedipus jokes here, this theory seemed to be true throughout many of the following events in history. In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram ran an experiment where he broke participants into pairs and gave them a task. Every time their partner made a mistake, one participant was instructed to administer a shock. Shocks increased in levels from 15 to 450 volts. When participants shocked their partners, the partners would scream in pain. When participants refused to shock their partners, Milgram instructed them to continue. Every participant in the experiment made it all the way up to 300 volts, with over 60% of participants reaching a level of 450 volts. This experiment indicated how susceptible people are to authority figures. If someone tells us to do something enough times and forcefully enough, even if we know it's wrong, many of us will do it. In 1978, over 900 people died from drinking cyanide-laced Flavor Aid at the instruction of their leader, Jim Jones. These adults had consumed the drink willingly, aware that it was filled with poison, some even giving it to their children. When people have a leader they trust, the boundaries of human instinct are tested. Some of us will act against our own objective best interest and the interest of those we love when we trust our leaders and our peers enough. In 2018, Keith Raniere, founder of the NXIVM cult, was arrested on a series of crimes including human sex trafficking. NXIVM had originally branded itself as a multi-level marketing company, or MLM, which sold personal and professional development products in a pyramid-like structure. The type of organization that people often join as a last resort when they're struggling for income or desperate for some kind of human connection or sense of community. On January 6, 2021, Congress met to confirm Joe Biden as the president, successor to Donald Trump. Since the nearly week-long election day back in November 2020, many of Trump's supporters claimed that Biden's victory was fraudulent, including Trump himself. Under his influence, a crowd of his supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol building, breaking inside with weapons, resulting in the death of 5 people. Further damage may still be reported. At the time that I'm filming this video, this event happened just a week ago. On this channel, we talk a lot about business owner ethics. We talk about MLM companies and how they prey on people in the same ways that cults do. We discuss how MLMs and pyramid schemes, some of the most unethical business structures out there, target people at their lowest points. When they're broke, when they're unemployed, when they're going through cancer, when they're trapped inside their house due to a year-long pandemic. These companies siphon money out of their consultants, treating their employees as their customers, all while feeding them empowering messages and encouraging them to prioritize themselves and cut out the people in their life who oppose them. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you're probably familiar with how MLMs and cults often share a lot of similar properties, especially in an extreme case like NXIVM. But we don't often talk about the cults that are structurally built into our everyday ways of life. The cults that are nearly impossible to escape. During this video, I am going to be talking about some political issues, but I am pretty much only going to refer to the United States, since the United States is the only country I've ever lived in. For a long time, I've been asking myself and the other people around me a big question. At what point do political movements, and especially political parties, cross over into the realm of being cults? At what point does a politician stop being just the leader of a city or of a country and instead become a cult leader? And if these groups are cults, then how can we break free of them when so much of what they do influences the policies that dictate our everyday lives and our survival? Today, we are going to explore that question under the guide of the book The Cult of Trump by Steven Hassan, as well as current news articles and various current events from the years 2020 and 2021. All sources for this video will be listed in the description below. Today's video is going to be a lot, and it's going to be really controversial, but hey, got this platform, have a channel. There are some big issues and some really nasty stuff going on in the world right now. It's important that we talk about it. So let's talk about it.
Get you some nuts.
There was lots of memes.
Makes me wonder if I should take up lesbianism.
Chicago. You guys asked for it.
Hi everyone, I'm Savvy. Welcome back to my channel, Savvy Writes Books. Here we talk about books, writing, small business owner life, the anti-MLM movement, and exposing the business gurus who are responsible for scamming and exploiting a lot of new entrepreneurs and small business owners. Today's video kind of exists outside of those topics, but also combines a few of them. While we review this book, The Cult of Trump, we're going to discuss the ways that political parties and cult leaders often operate with the same manipulative tactics. If you enjoy this video, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. I put out new videos every Monday and Friday at 11 a.m. Central, and every Wednesday night I host the author sleepover live stream where a bunch of us get together, be productive, get some writing done. It's a lot of fun. Also, I wanted to let everyone know that I'm not going to be censoring anything in this video. I'm gonna go full out. This video is gonna cover a lot of disturbing topics, and as a result of that, it's pretty likely that it's gonna get demonetized. But I do think it's important to discuss these topics openly and in full, so I'm going to do it anyway. However, even if this video gets demonetized, that is okay, because I am so grateful that today's video actually has a sponsor! Today's video is sponsored by the Gray and Gold podcast. I'm going to talk a little bit about this podcast, and quick disclaimer, I'm a little biased because the two hosts of this podcast are two people that I absolutely love so much, so I'm really grateful to you guys for sponsoring this video. Thank you. But the Gray and Gold podcast is hosted by author and music reaction channel RK Gold and indie musician and also live streamer Great and Square. I love these two so much. I've actually collaborated with both of them before. The Gray and Gold podcast interviews guests from all fields, engaging in conversations from the universe and psychedelics to fantasy sports. Hear interviews from guests like Brandy Williams, CEO of Generation Success, or enter the mind of atheist Aaron Robb before blasting off into space with Mary Liz Bender. Also, I was once a guest on it. Sorry, I'm biased. The Gray and Gold podcast is available on all streaming platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all of them. All of the links where you can listen to this podcast are linked in the description below, and I highly recommend it. These two get into some really deep and interesting discussions, whether they're interviewing someone famous or someone big in a certain industry and learning a little bit more about them, or whether they're talking about issues related to religion and being skeptical of certain things and examining things from different angles. They kind of examine issues from a bunch of different sides and look at things in very interesting philosophical ways, and they always get me thinking, like, constantly. So even if they didn't sponsor me, I would be promoting the shit out of this podcast because they are fantastic. So thank you so much again to the Gray and Gold podcast for sponsoring this video. Everybody, please check out their links in the description below. You will not be disappointed. It is one of my favorite podcasts to listen to. Actually, it is my favorite podcast. And in addition to this video's sponsor, today's video was also brought to you by my Patreon supporters. Their names are up on the screen. They're also linked in the description below. All of my top tier patrons who contribute $5 a month and up or more also have their own YouTube channel links or social media links or website links, all linked in the description below. So go show them some love. Some of them are small business owners as well, and I want to help promote them. So please check out all those people. If your name is on the screen, I owe you a million thank yous. I really appreciate you supporting this channel. Now let's talk a little bit about politicians and cult leaders. A lot of what I'm going to talk about in today's video is going to center on Donald Trump, since I have the most hard evidence to discuss his cult ties. However, we are going to explore whether people outside of him are running cults too, and whether people beyond Trump's supporters are also susceptible to being inside of a cult. As a disclaimer, I am a little biased going into this because, as I've made very clear on this channel before, I do not like Donald Trump. I think he's a terrible president. I think he's handled the pandemic in a disastrous way. I have never been a fan of him or the messages that he puts forward into the world. I think that he's been basically one of the worst presidents we've ever had. So I'm not a fan of him. I'm not a supporter of his. I feel like a lot of people could probably tell that about me, and I've also mentioned it in videos before. I'm open about the fact that in the primary I voted for Bernie. In the general election I very reluctantly voted for Biden. I'm not a fan of Biden, but I tried to swallow my vomit and say this is a vote against Trump, okay? I did my best. So we're gonna actually get into that later a little as well. But disclaimer, that's where I'm coming from on this. I am not a fan of Trump. However, I did try to review all of the information I had, including this book, along with all of the articles that we're going to be talking about, as objectively as possible to come to these conclusions. So I hope you enjoy this video, and if you have thoughts that are different than something I said, please feel free to leave a comment down below. So to get started, I'm going to talk a little bit about this book and about its author, Steven Hassan. So this book, The Cult of Trump, Cult Mind Control and Presidential Politics. Since his election in 2016, Donald Trump's behavior has become increasingly erratic and alarming, and yet many of his followers remain blindly devoted. Behind this bizarre display of lies and narcissism, there is a familiar pattern of a cult leader and his followers. Steven Hassan, one of America's leading cult and mind control experts, has been counseling people out of destructive relationships for more than 40 years. In this book, he takes a reader on a journey into the dark and dangerous world of mind manipulation, drawing parallels between Trump and some notorious cult leaders such as Jim Jones, L. Ron Hubbard, and Sun Myung Moon. Trump claims, like many cult leaders, that only he can fix America. Yet, as Hassan shows, Trump is part of a complex web of influence that includes the Christian right, the alt-right, and the right-wing media. An accessible and in-depth analysis of the president, The Cult of Trump reveals that under the right circumstances, even sane, rational, well-adjusted people can be persuaded to believe the most outrageous ideas and leader. So we're going to be talking about this book today. Steven Hassan is actually a huge name in the world of cult research and cults and that type of thing. Back in the 70s, he was involved in the Unification Church cult, also known as the Moonies, and once he escaped that cult, he invented and coined the bite model, which we are also going to go into. I've talked about this a little in the past when analyzing MLM companies and pyramid schemes and trying to determine if they were cults, is a way to determine if you are in a cult or not. And it's not the be-all, end-all, but it's a good place to start when you're trying to analyze your situation and your surroundings and trying to determine whether the group you're a part of is just a normal organization or if it does have some cult influence. So BITE is B-I-T-E, and it stands for behavioral control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. And in this video, in the book, Steven Hassan goes pretty deep into each element of it, but this video is primarily going to focus on the I, on the information control, because I think that is a huge element of how politicians are able to indoctrinate their own viewers and their own supporters a lot. During this video, I am also going to be collaborating with Taylor from the channel, The Anti-Bot. She is one of my favorite anti-MLM channels. I think she does fantastic research in all of her videos. I have linked her channel in the description below, and throughout it, she and I are going to be discussing this book together and also discussing our thoughts on cult influences within American politics. Hello, I am here with Taylor from The Anti-Bot again. I love when we get to collab. This is like one of my favorite collabs. We have the best time.
I know, we always have really good conversations.
We do. The last time we collabed, I think, was getting mad at Tim's sales.
Oh man, yeah, that was a doozy.
When you read this book, or when you read it the first time and the parts you reread, what were some of the main takeaways you had from it?
I really, I think the thing that I took away the most from it was just the specific wording and phrases and repetition that Trump uses to kind of instill certain beliefs certain beliefs onto his followers and sort of radicalize them in this sort of like subliminal way. Especially just his repetition of certain phrases like law and order. Like, how many times did he tweet law and order on Twitter?
Yeah.
Which, the book was actually written before he started tweeting those things, but it kind of still is along the same lines. I think, just how much influence Trump can now have just through his words and through the fact that he can use social media to his benefit.
Yeah. So now that we have a little bit of background on the book that I'm going to be referencing, on Steven Hassan, and on the BITE model, let's talk a little bit about how political parties can fit into this information control idea. I think part of it is that we have a weird system that's like not really capitalism, but pretends to be capitalism, where it's like large corporations own news stations, and like the majority of information is disseminated through like something owned by like 3 major companies own everything, including like Coca-Cola, and like half the news networks are like all owned together. So like all of these companies basically acting not quite as monopolies, but I guess more like oligopolies. And that, I feel like that's kind of part of the problem. that, and then they kind of end up getting to decide who becomes the leader based on like that's the whole thing. I think part of the reason Trump even got any attention in this, when most people weren't even taking him seriously at first, is like the more outrageous he acted, the more people would watch the TV or the news or click on websites with ad links so that they could be like, whoa, he did what? And like, regardless of whether you liked him or not, people wanted to know, like, he did what crazy thing? And so before you knew it, all of the news was about him. And so he was the one that, like, no publicity is bad publicity. It's like that thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I kind of like fell into that too, because, you know, I would go to his Twitter and be like, well, what crazy thing has he done now? You know?
Yeah.
And now that he doesn't have Twitter, I kind of like don't really keep up with it. So I think the fact that he had as much press coverage as he did because he said ridiculous things pushed him up to the top. You know, I think you want to believe that if you have important good things to say, then you'll rise to power. But I don't think it has to do with if you have good things to say. I think it's just if you say a lot, you know, if you're constantly in people's face, people are gonna, I don't know, like people are gonna see you more.
Even when I vote in a primary, like half the time the people in the primary are determined based on which companies are backing which people and giving them money and giving them airtime and things like that. So I think it's this weird thing we have right now where it's like, we want free market capitalism, but it's really not free market capitalism, because if corporations and the government have that much influence on each other, there is no separation of business and state, and it's not true capitalism then, I don't think.
Yeah, right.
And I'm not saying true capitalism is the answer. I think that there's probably a completely different system we need to be looking into. But what we have now is definitely not working at all. It's taking like the worst parts of capitalism and making those what we have.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of describing it, because it basically comes down to whoever has the most money is going to end up winning, because they're the ones that can get the most airtime and the most publicity and the most traction. And that shouldn't be how it is. I think when people are running, I feel like it should all be a level playing field. No one should have more money to invest in things than other people, because we should just be voting based on the issues, not based on whoever can get the most publicity out there.
I was interested. So it's been a long time since I've ever seen Fox News. I don't have cable at all, so I haven't seen Fox. I haven't seen CNN. I haven't seen like anything. I mostly read things on the internet. But I thought that section was interesting about media and information control, because I think that is a huge thing. And I think when you're in a position where you feel uncomfortable questioning your leader and you also feel uncomfortable seeking sources outside the one that your leader approves of, then you're probably in a cult. And I feel that that's true of Trump and also of other leaders. I feel like that's kind of a common thing across the board. But this book really delved into how Trump took over kind of like Fox News, which I haven't watched in a while. I think the last time I probably saw it in passing was when it was like, Mitt Romney's better than Obama, like whatever. They're pretty similar. But when like now apparently it became so pro-Trump. I don't know. What did you think of that? I mean, have you seen any shows on Fox News or like anything like that?
Well, like you, I don't really watch I try not to like watch news like that, because it's going to be biased. I try to go like directly to the source when I'm trying to figure out something. But I have seen Fox News occasionally, just because like when I go to my parents' house, it's usually playing on their TV. But what I think is really interesting, and this kind of goes along with Trump creating like fake enemies, is that he wants to control what his viewers are saying or what his viewers are seeing by saying, you know, don't trust any of these news outlets because they're corrupt, they're bad, they're trying to paint me in a bad light, yada, yada, yada. So that they are only seeing things from, you know, Fox News or this one source that happens to be pro-Trump at the time. But as soon as Fox News starts to get a little more like, we're not really jiving with some of the things that Trump is saying, now Trump's, you know, against Fox News and is like all about Breitbart or whatever. And so he really wants to control what his followers are viewing, so they're only seeing positive things about him.
Right. So to an extent, I think information control is one of the biggest reasons. That's one of the biggest things that made me think that, like, the way we view political parties tends to be cult-like, and information control is like the really big one that tipped me off with that. Because news stations and because newspapers or now online news sources, YouTube videos, everything out there makes money off of ads, and because as humans and as viewers, the product itself is our attention being sold to advertisers, the way that ideas get known, that movements get known, and that politicians get known is through creating a persona that gets the most ad revenue and that generates the most money for that station. However, it wasn't always this way. Just 40 years ago, we had something in place called the Fairness Doctrine, which didn't allow this to happen. I'm going to talk about what the Fairness Doctrine is for a little bit. And I'm not necessarily saying it needs to be reinstated as it was, because it definitely had a lot of its own flaws, but I think that it was onto something that we might want to reconsider for the future. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, the Fairness Doctrine was in place in the United States from 1949 to 1987. The Fairness Doctrine was formulated by the Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC, and it required licensed radio and television broadcasters to present fair and balanced coverage of controversial issues of interest to their communities, including by devoting equal airtime to opposing points of view. The origins of the Fairness Doctrine lay in the Radio Act of 1927, which limited radio broadcasting to licensed broadcasters but mandated that the licenses serve the public interest. The Federal Communications Act of 1934 supplanted the Radio Act and created the FCC, the chief regulatory body governing the U.S. airwaves, with a mission to encourage the larger and more effective use of radio in public interest. In 1949, the Commission promulgated a report in the matter of editorializing by broadcast licensees that interpreted the public interest provisions of the Radio Act and the Communications Act as a mandate to promote a basic standard of fairness in broadcasting. Licensees had the duty to devote airtime and fair and balanced coverage of controversial issues that were of interest to their home communities. Individuals who were the subject of editorials or who perceive themselves to be the subject of unfair attacks in news programming were to be granted an opportunity to reply. Also, candidates for public office were entitled to equal airtime. In 1959, a portion of the Fairness Doctrine became U.S. law when Congress amended the Communications Act with the doctrine's mandate of equal airtime for office seekers. The revised law recognized some exceptions to the equal airtime mandate, but held that such exceptions did not annul licensees' obligation to provide equal airtime and balanced coverage of conflicting views on issues of public importance. The Fairness Doctrine was never without its opponents, however, many of whom perceived equal airtime requirement as an infringement on the right to freedom of speech enshrined in the First Amendment in the Constitution. In 1969, the doctrine survived a challenge in the Supreme Court case Red Lion Broadcasting versus Federal Communications Commission, in which the court found that the FCC had acted within its jurisdiction in ruling that a Pennsylvania radio station had violated the Fairness Doctrine by denying response time to a writer who had been characterized in a broadcast as a communist sympathizer. In 1985, however, the FCC decided that the doctrine had a chilling effect upon freedom of speech. At about that time, representatives of cable and satellite television networks challenged the applicability of the doctrine to their industries. In 1987, the FCC formally repealed the Fairness Doctrine but maintained both the editorial and personal attack provisions, which remained in effect until 2000. In addition, until they were finally repealed by the Commission in 2011, more than 80 media rules maintained language that implemented the doctrine. So there are elements of this that I like. I like that by law on a news station, two different candidates running for a position were guaranteed equal time and that type of thing. I think that had some good to it. However, I'm very torn. And just to be clear, I don't know exactly what the solution is here, because part of me thinks that regulating communication in any way is really outside of the government's jurisdiction. The idea that I think anyone should be able to broadcast on TV. Anyone should be able to go on the radio. Anyone should be able to go anywhere and say whatever the fuck they want. I don't think the government should ever be able to regulate that. But at the same time, when it's not regulated, then what you have is giant corporate conglomerates coming together, controlling news stations and only playing what's most profitable, which equally cuts people off from news. So I don't know what the solution is, but I think that this had some elements that might want to be reinstated. If there are official news sources for some things, then maybe we do need to have that type of regulation with it, but that is a huge discussion, which we are going to continue having. But I think that one of the core problems we have here isn't just that the news wants to portray the most obnoxious things out there, but why they do, right? We have this idea in the US where politicians and leaders are treated as celebrities. Too often we see people joining fandoms surrounding their president or surrounding their mayor. It's a little weird. And in a lot of cases, it becomes indicative of a cult of personality.
I do think that Trump has a very specific personality, and it's malignant narcissism.
Yes, I loved learning about this in the book. I had never heard of malignant narcissism before, but I think that describes him perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, and it goes back not just his presidency or the years leading up to his presidency. I mean, his malignant narcissism was embedded into him as a child because of the way he was raised by his father.
Yeah.
So, I do think that someone else could come up that's not Trump that could, start this kind of cult-like behavior again. But I also think that Trump's personality is so specific that I don't know, it would have to take someone that has his level of narcissism, which I'm sure there's tons of people that do, but I've never seen anyone else besides for Trump be that narcissistic and that able to just manipulate and not care.
In the Cult of Trump, let's turn to page 40, where we are going to talk a little bit more about what malignant narcissism is and the effect that it has on cults of personality. So, page 40, he says, there is an even more dangerous kind of narcissism, one defined by a darker and more destructive pattern. It is fittingly called malignant narcissism and arises when narcissism combines with other psychopathological traits. According to Malkin, political leaders such as Hitler, Vladimir Putin, and Kim Jong-un exhibit malignant narcissism. As Robert J. Lifton notes in The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, such narcissism in a leader can lead to a malignant normality, a term Lifton coined while studying Nazi doctors who carried out terrible experiments but were able to justify and normalize them through a kind of adaptation to evil. According to page 41, it was the social psychologist Erich Fromm who, in 1964, first coined the term malignant narcissism. He did so to describe what he thought was the most severe mental sickness, one that represented the quintessence of evil, mostly because of the lack of empathy and morality on the part of the patient. Though the Diagnostic Bible of the American Psychiatric Association, the DSM-5, does not recognize malignant narcissism as a distinct type of narcissism, researchers suggest that it combines narcissistic personality disorder with 3 additional psychopathologies: antisocial behavior, self-affirming sadism, and paranoia. And these qualities of a malignant narcissist are often what feeds into someone growing into a cult leader. We'll talk about this a little more when I get into the section about how Trump was able to gain his cult following. But for a little more on how political parties fit the BITE model, I want to turn to page 71, where we are going to frame this discussion through something important called fundamental attribution error. I've seen a quote by Stephen Covey, who's the author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and those type of self-help books, where he said that we judge others by their behavior, but we judge ourselves by our intentions. And this goes along with fundamental attribution error and how fundamental attribution error has led to further divide among different ideologies within the US. According to Stephen Hassan on page 71, in 1967, 2 researchers, Edward Jones and Victor Harris, conducted an experiment in which subjects were asked to read essays either for or against Fidel Castro. When the subjects believed that the writers freely chose their positions, they rated them as being correspondingly pro or anti-Castro. But even when subjects were told that the writer had been directed to take their stance, subjects still rated the pro-Castro writers as being in favor of Castro and the anti-Castro speakers against him. This psychological bias, known as the fundamental attribution error, is important to understand before we go any further in explaining the science of mind control. When we see a negative behavior in another person, for example, joining a cult, we might explain it as an expression of a personality defect within that person. They were weak, gullible, needed someone to control them. When we see such behavior in ourselves, we tend to attribute it to an external situation or contextual factor, I was lied to or pressured. The fundamental attribution error refers to this tendency to interpret other people's behavior as resulting largely from their disposition while disregarding environmental and social influences. He gives an example of his own cult time when he says, "When I was in the Moonies, people probably assumed I was weak, dumb, or crazy to join such a group. I thought I was doing something good for myself and the planet. At the same time, I might have looked at a Hare Krishna devotee and thought they were weird. The truth is, we were both being lied to and manipulated. We also see it at play in our country between Trump supporters and anti-Trumpers, each assuming the other is dumb, stupid, or crazy. We are all affected by situational factors, including our exposure to influence. By understanding the fundamental attribution error, we are encouraged not to blame other people, but rather to learn about the influences that have led them to adopt their position and work to expand the sharing of information and perspectives." So I've looked into a little bit of why people supported Donald Trump, and you know what? There were a variety of reasons, as I would expect. If over 70 million people voted for the guy, they're not all going to have the same circumstances or the same way of thinking. That's just not possible. Do I think they were all balls deep in his cult? Not 100%. But do I think a lot of them were? Most likely. And we're going to talk about it. One type of people that I found were big into supporting Trump were people who had felt left behind by the government. Some of these people had even voted for Barack Obama in 2008 and in 2012, but after seeing no real change in their everyday lives, realized they needed someone outside of the political establishment who was going to turn the whole thing on its head and do something totally different. And then when Trump stormed in with his "I'm not like other politicians" shtick, despite the fact that he was in with politicians and he was a billionaire and he was just like the rest of them, the way he presented himself gave people hope that maybe they were being heard for once. With tons and tons of manufacturing jobs being continually lost in Midwestern states and being outsourced overseas, a lot of people were losing their jobs and their livelihood and were in a vulnerable position to join this kind of cult. However, those are not the only types of Trump supporters. There are some Trump supporters who I do think were coming at this from a more selfish and borderline sociopathic angle, so we need to talk about them too.
Yeah, he definitely preys on people's vulnerabilities in that way, as specific groups of people. And I think, America was better for this certain group of people, 50 years ago maybe, but it was better in the sense that they were insanely privileged compared to what they are now. Mm-hmm. And they think that that's a norm for them, right? But it's really no, you were just privileged and could do whatever you wanted to do, and now we have more equality, and so that's why you feel like you're being discriminated against.
However, fundamental attribution error might lead all of Trump's dissenters, all of his opponents, all people who hate him, to see his supporters as being 100% in the hateful anti-women white supremacist group, and Trump's supporters who are supporting him because they're in poverty or something like that might use fundamental attribution error to see everyone around them as one of the good guys and completely disregard that extremist and harmful faction that does exist and is real. Also, I think it would be ignorant if I didn't address that there is a racial element at play here as well. I've talked about this in videos in the past, but racism is alive and well in the US. It does still exist, both on a person-to-person level and on a structural level. Extremely hard on a structural level. So I do think to an extent we need to talk about the fact that there was racial privilege at play with the people who stormed into the Capitol building. This article from earlier this week on US News and World Report is called "The US Capitol Riots and the Double Standard of Protest Policing." Last year, on a sunny June afternoon in Washington, D.C., police officers in riot gear lobbed stun grenades into demonstrators gathered near the White House to condemn police use of deadly force against African Americans. Behind a cloud of pepper spray, the officers used batons and shields to manhandle the crowd in Lafayette Square, making way for President Donald Trump to walk through for a photo op at a nearby church. The demonstrators, most of them black, had chanted slogans denouncing police brutality or carried signs with the names of black people rebel who died at the hands of law enforcement. Last week, under gray January skies, a frenzied mob, overwhelmingly white, many wearing red Make America Great Again caps, at least one man toting a Confederate battle flag, trampled uniformed police officers, breached flimsy barriers, and stormed into the U.S. Capitol building during an ongoing session of Congress in Washington to show support for the president and violently disrupt the certification of the 2020 presidential election. Some were clad in tactical gear, carrying guns and toting bundles of plastic zip-tie handcuffs. Egged on by Trump himself, they swarmed inside windows and looting congressional offices. Some rioters shouted about lynching powerful lawmakers, including Vice President Mike Pence and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who was barricaded inside a safe room. When the building was secured hours later, authorities found a gallows and a noose. After the sacking of arguably the most important building in America last Wednesday, critics, including President-elect Joe Biden, have compared it to the heavy-handed law enforcement used against Black Lives Matter demonstrators in Washington. It's yet another example, they argue, of two Americas, this one centered on protests and how police handled them. In Black America, critics contend largely peaceful demonstrations are aggressively policed, like the clashes BLM protesters had with police in Washington, Minneapolis, and Portland last year. At one point in Washington, protesters confronted law enforcement officers whose identification patches and nameplates were stripped from their uniforms. In Portland, some BLM demonstrators were arrested on the spot, swept into unmarked vans, and whisked to secret detention sites. In white America, they say, far-right demonstrators seem to face far less law enforcement muscle, even though some participating groups like the Proud Boys have violent reputations and others seem to embrace intimidation as part of their protest strategy. Critics point to the deadly Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville in 2017, as well as last year's spate of right-wing protests opposing coronavirus-related public restrictions. In those largely white demonstrations, protesters openly carried firearms, including semi-automatic rifles, and repeatedly tried to barge into state legislatures. Representative Cori Bush, a first-term Missouri Democrat who was a leader in her home state's Black Lives Matter protest movement, told MSNBC that protesters would have been shot if they were black like her. We wouldn't have made it up those steps, she said. So this article goes on to talk more about that, and I think that this is an important point to make, which is that law enforcement traditionally has not treated everyone equally. And I know some people are going to come up in the comments with examples of like, oh, but this person was violent here and this person was nonviolent here. I get it. Every case-by-case basis is going to have outliers, is going to have exceptions, and there are going to be individuals in every case that aren't going to fit with everything I'm saying here. But I'm talking about on average across the board, you could tell that there was a difference. It's probable that if those people had been black, they would have been killed a lot quicker. A lot of people agree with that, and that's what I'm saying, and I think that it's important that we address that point and take that point into account when we're talking about some of these issues, that race does play a factor, and we're going to talk a little bit more later about race, gender, and class discrimination, and how those factor into Trump's cult and into his opposition just the same, so stay tuned for that. But what I'm getting at here is that Trump's supporters are a mix of some people who were used to having privileges and were worried about losing them under a more equal world, and also people who were economically disadvantaged and were just looking for any way out and saw it in someone like Trump. They're a mix of people just like everyone else, but as we've been seeing, a mix of people can often end up in cults. On this channel, we talk a lot about multi-level marketing companies. We talk about the anti-MLM movement and ways that MLMs reach a variety of different people. You see people who get preyed on from all different religious backgrounds, racial backgrounds, both male and female in different ways, because these groups target different groups of people's insecurities. A company like World Financial Group or Legal Shield is more likely to target men using like the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book and things about, as a man, don't you want to provide a better life? Don't you want to become super wealthy and be the man of your house? Whereas a company like LuLaRoe or Mary Kay might target housewives in Utah whose Mormon religion is telling them that they shouldn't be working outside the home, yet their family still does need an additional source of income, and then they fall into the MLM, which becomes a cult. People of all different backgrounds are going to be, are all susceptible. And I think it's a thing that we need to keep in mind, that none of us are really immune to this influence under the right set of circumstances. And since cults and MLMs have so many similar qualities, let's talk about how they're similar and how Donald Trump himself has been heavily involved in both. First, let's talk real quick about how MLMs fit this bite model and fall prey to these cult influences. On page 17 of this book, Hassan talks about commercial cults as a type of cult, right? Donald Trump's cult is more of a political cult or a cult of personality, but a commercial cult is just a cult just the same, and Trump has also been involved in these, so here we go. Page 17, commercial cults prey on people's desire for wealth and power. Many are pyramid-shaped marketing organizations whose members deceptively recruit people who, in turn, recruit others, who then provide income for the recruiting member. Companies like Amway and Herbalife promise get-rich-quick schemes through selling goods such as health and beauty products and supplements. These pyramid scheme or multi-level marketing organizations promise big bucks, but in fact, 99% of participants lose money. And then on page 54, he goes on to explain how MLMs are particularly susceptible to malignant narcissism. Malignant narcissists exploit people for personal benefit, often for financial gain. Cult leaders are notorious for making money off their followers. Moon sent legions of members out on mobile fundraising teams, basically selling flowers and candy for long hours in terrible weather and often in dangerous neighborhoods. They were told to lie to the public to say the money was for Christian youth programs or drug rehab centers. Multi-level marketing groups sell vitamins, supplements, water, and other products, as well as lectures, courses, and retreats of dubious value, all in an effort to raise funds. Later on this page, he goes into how Trump has been involved in some of these MLMs. Trump family-associated businesses continue to attract legal attention. As of October 2018, 3 Trump-associated companies, ACN, a multi-level marketing company, the Trump Network, a company that sold health products, and the Trump Institute, a traveling real estate lecture series, were targets of lawsuits. One of the complaints alleges that Trump and his children received millions of dollars in secret payments and were aware that the vast majority of consumers would lose whatever money they invested. Now, let's take a look at Trump's involvement with MLMs. This article is from Forbes on September 29th, 2020, and it's called Trump's Biggest Side Hustle Outside of Apprentice, Multi-Level Marketing Schemes. President Trump made over $11 million endorsing 2 multi-level marketing companies in the 2000s for which he and his children would later be sued for fraud, according to the New York Times, which revealed for the first time how much money the future president received for hawking the MLMs, and that those 2 endorsements were the most lucrative side deals during his height of fame from The Apprentice. Trump's most lucrative deal, and $8.8 million over a decade, was for promoting ACN, an MLM whose members sold telecom equipment and services on DVDs of its products through testimonials, with some alleging in a 2018 class action lawsuit that Trump misled them by claiming ACN was a great opportunity and lower in risk. Trump nabbed another $2.6 million licensing his name to the Trump Network, another MLM that sold vitamins, before the company sold its remaining assets in 2011, with the owners declaring bankruptcy. The Trump Network is also part of the 2018 lawsuit, which is still making its way through the court after a Manhattan judge ruled in 2019 that the 4 plaintiffs could pursue claims of fraud, false advertising, and unfair competition. The plaintiffs in the class action lawsuit said they suffered financial losses during the involvement in both MLMs, and the judge allowed the suit to proceed in May after the Trumps moved for the case to be suspended, but they will appeal the decision. Trump promoted an ACN video phone in a 2011 episode of Celebrity Apprentice. According to the Times, the video phone's technology was nearly obsolete when the episode aired. It is notoriously difficult to succeed as a distributor in an MLM. Generating income is dependent on selling the MLM's products, but also recruiting new sellers into the organization. MLMs are often referred to as pyramid schemes, although the Federal Trade Commission has no hard definition for what constitutes a pyramid scheme. A 2018 AARP study found that nearly 75% of MLM distributors either lost money or broke even. According to the Times, French regulators found that 1% of ACN participants actually made money, while the rest earned about $35 per month or broke even. The class action lawsuit also names Eric Trump, Ivanka Trump, and Donald Trump Jr. So Trump's been involved in pyramid schemes, y'all. But beyond that, Trump has also been tied with the family who created Amway. We think of Amway as the multi-level marketing company that shows the clearest signs of having ties to being a cult. And y'all, I'm not going to spend too much time in this video delving into the ways that Amway's a cult, because I'm actually interviewing 2 former Amway sellers who are going to talk to me about the cult shit that they witnessed while they were in Amway. So that is coming in a future video, so stay tuned if you want to hear more about how Amway's a cult. But Donald Trump's connections with Amway make it even clearer that he has been completely fine with cult tactics and dealings. The DeVos family fortune Amway. When DeVos married her husband Dick DeVos in the 1980s, she married into the family that created Amway. The marketing company recorded revenue of $9.5 billion last year, a decline of 12%. Amway said the stronger U.S. dollar was to blame, as well as soft sales in China. In 2010, Amway settled a lawsuit that alleged it operated as a pyramid scheme. So for those of you that don't remember, Betsy DeVos was the Secretary of Education. She was very unqualified for the position, in my opinion. She seemed to have no idea what public education was all about. She served that purpose. She is married to the Amway family. So make of that what you will. So from all of this, I think it's pretty clear that Donald Trump has been involved with organizations that are known for operating like cults. It's not too much of a stretch to assume that he is okay with the ways that cults operate and that he himself might try to gain cult influence. So in this next section of the video, we are going to delve deep into how Trump first gained this cult influence and how he found this following who was willing to devote themselves so fully to him. First, let's talk about what about America in 2016 made so many people susceptible to cult influences. Starting at the beginning of this book, we're going just to page 9. There's a section called A Modern Phenomenon, which says, the rise of cults can be attributed to a few other factors. Among the most fundamental is the breakdown of families and communities and the growing sense that our society is in disarray. Economic factors play a role. A large and growing segment of the world's population is poor, while a relatively small elite controls an ever-increasing share of the world's resources. So income disparity is on the rise. I don't think this is news to anyone. We've even seen articles about how during the pandemic, billionaires have gotten richer and richer, people like Jeff Bezos, who now that everyone's shopping on Amazon while we're stuck at home, while many people are becoming unemployed and struggling to find healthcare dealing with this virus. So income disparities growing is not really news to anyone. Then on page 65, in a chapter titled America, a Country Wired for Manipulation, we have this. How did this happen? How did people, politicians, and ordinary citizens fall in line to support a man who stood for everything they despised a few short years earlier?
He had a lot of really religious followers, which is so wild because he doesn't seem like from what I know, he's not a particularly religious person.
Yeah, I don't think so.
The way, like, a lot of people who are very religious and were like, oh, Bill Clinton was a cheater, he's a bad guy for that, and now Trump is like out here with like has kids with 3 different women and like has objectified women who are underage and has done like all of this awful stuff that is pretty much against any religion, like, but they're suddenly like, oh, he is the one that God wants to win. Like, that's wild. Like, that's crazy that people would think that.
Yeah, and the thing is that if Trump would have been on like the Democratic nominee, people would have said that he was the Antichrist. Like the same people would have said that he's the Antichrist because of all of his moral failings. But for some reason, because he's on their side, suddenly it's, well, God can use anyone.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason that I think Trump is a cult leader above all else is that I don't believe he's really a Republican. I mean, for the most of his life, he was in the Democratic Party. He's flip-flopped, yeah, and I think that, like, it's because of where the country was. Like, the Democratic Party was pretty clear on, like, okay, Hillary Clinton is a pretty strong contender. She's probably going to be the nominee. That was pretty obvious. And then the Republican Party had like 20 people running and nobody knew who was going to be. And none of them really had a strong presence because like Mitt Romney wasn't running and no one really liked, Ted Cruz or like no one likes him, like all that stuff. So like with all of that, there was an opening for like someone with a big personality could come in and manipulate everyone. If it had been the other side, he would have done it there instead. I think that it was really just about his own need for power above anything else.
I think it's in this specific time, people were looking for an authoritarian leader.
How did they lose their moral compass, override their conscience, and throw good judgment and common sense out the window? To find answers ultimately means looking at how the mind works. While its machinations are still a mystery, much progress has been made in understanding how we as individuals take in and process information, and also how our collective minds can be manipulated and controlled. We go through our days thinking we are rational beings, but we are much more susceptible to manipulation than we think. Cults proliferate when society is undergoing rapid change, and particularly when there is a breakdown of trust between people in major institutions. The Great Recession of 2008 created economic hardships so severe that many people have not fully recovered. This is especially true in the American heartland, where Trump has many supporters. Many feel betrayed by government, religion, science, and big business. Every day, the headlines are filled with news of clergy sexual abuse, political corruption, corporations caught lying and cheating, and pharmaceutical companies pushing drugs with terrible side effects, and in the case of opioids, creating a national crisis. Meanwhile, mass media, TV and magazines, as well as Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, are filled with news about the rich and famous, chronicling their every movement and even their medals. Celebrities, often vacuous and defined by their access to money, are rushing in to fill the cultural void, capturing our attention and our loyalty, engaging the public through subtle and not so subtle influence techniques. Many people are drawn to them, vicariously experiencing their wealth and fame. We live in a celebrity culture with a celebrity president. With social media, it has become possible for ordinary citizens to become celebrities in their own right, using some of the same influence techniques that people like Trump exploit. So basically what that's telling us is that people who are undergoing crisis are seeing this huge disparity. They're seeing celebrities and billionaires, and especially with social media and with being surrounded by screens all the time, and with the most outrageous and ostentatious stuff being thrown in our face for the ad revenue, we're constantly seeing what we can't have and wanting to follow people who do have that in hopes that we can gain that as well. We see this over and over again with business gurus, with Tony Robbins, with Grant Cardone, with all the people I trash on this channel. The reason people follow them is that they want those riches, they want what those people have. In a society where money is power, and when you can influence things and live your life and survive and have less stress the more money you have, it's true that when you find someone who's rich and famous and you're constantly bombarded with messages of how great they are every second of every day, over time you're going to want to be like them. But none of this really proves that Trump was intentionally using cult tactics. However, earlier in this book, there are examples of Trump's early use of toxic positivity and how many of his greatest influences and people he modeled himself after were cultish in their own right. So let's talk a little bit about this. When we talk about MLMs and cults, one of the main things we discuss is toxic positivity, which is the idea that we have to shut out all negative thinking because we won't be able to attract good things to ourselves, and we won't be able to believe in ourselves enough and accomplish what we want to if we ever let negative thoughts or self-doubt cloud our judgment. Toxic positivity is a huge problem because it often prevents us from seeing the realities of a situation, and it often leads to behavior where you see people in MLMs or people in pyramid schemes who are losing tons of money and their family and friends are trying to get them out of it, and you see someone up at the top saying, just cut them off, just isolate yourself from them because they don't believe in your dream, they're not positive enough, they're dragging you down. We also see this in books like The Secret, in books about positive thinking and believing that if you stay positive through everything and shut yourself off to all negative forms of thought, then good things will come your way. And when they don't, you are blamed for not doing enough. It is a very victim-blaming type of system, and Trump very much buys into and utilizes this. So we're starting on page 26 here. Trump's early and aggressive quest for attention and validation would find an outlet in the teachings of Norman Vincent Peale, who was the pastor of Marble Collegiate Church located on West 29th Street in New York City. Nicknamed God's salesman, Peale taught a kind of forerunner to contemporary prosperity gospel. If you believe in yourself 100% and pray for financial success, God will grant you blessings. In a religious tradition where material wealth and success are the consequences of faith, poverty and failure are the wages of sin and doubt. Peale taught his followers to control their thoughts by pushing aside self-doubt, a form of self-hypnosis akin to thought stopping. Peale was enormously popular with the Trumps, and especially young Donald. I still remember Peale's sermons, Trump told the Iowa Family Leadership Summit in July 2015. You could listen to him all day long, and when you left the church, you were disappointed it was over. He was the greatest guy. According to Trump, the feeling was mutual. He thought I was the greatest student of all time. Peale remained connected to Trump for years. He would officiate at Trump's first wedding to Ivana, as well as the weddings of Trump's two sisters, Marianne and Elizabeth, and also at the funerals of Fred and Mary, Trump's parents. Trump would often quote or thank Peale. In a 2009 interview, Trump credited Peale's teachings with helping him survive his bankruptcies and other financial hard times. I refused to give in to the negative circumstances and never lost faith in myself. I didn't believe I was finished even when the newspapers were saying so, he said.
Promoting the whole positive thinking and toxic positivity at all costs, and it's that's where the cult leaders come in. only can think positively about me and that kind of thing.
And I think the fact that he had him as a pastor is kind of makes it unsurprising that Trump got involved with MLMs, because we see a lot of that same things, the toxic positivity, the BS self-help type stuff. We see that in MLMs a lot too. And so Trump definitely has that mindset as well.
So here we've got Trump, a super rich guy who credits one of the leaders of the toxic positivity movement and the prosperity gospel, who is Norman Vincent Peale, someone who laid the groundwork for people like Tony Robbins to come in and exploit everyone. Trump sees him as one of his greatest mentors. And now Trump, in 2016, he's entering this American society where the wealth gap is growing, where we're constantly bombarded of images on social media of needing to be richer, where we're right in a place where he can sink his toxic positivity in and gain support of people who would normally, under regular circumstances, completely disregard him. And a big part of this comes from how he was able to control the media and get free press just by being his obnoxious self. So we're on page 49. In his book, Win Bigly, Persuasion in a World Where Facts Don't Matter, Adams describes one of the fundamental principles of Trump's rhetorical style. Persuasion is all about the tools and techniques of changing people's minds, with or without facts or reason, Adams writes. When Trump claimed that Mexican immigrants are rapists, we may have recoiled in disgust, but we remembered it, and we talked about it. Adams would argue that Trump didn't mean all Mexican immigrants. He was intentionally exaggerating. He was using hyperbole, a persuasive tactic that provokes controversy and captures people's attention and emotions. An emotional speaker always makes his audience feel with him, even when there is nothing in his arguments, which is why many speakers try to overwhelm the audience with mere noise. Aristotle wrote in his classic work on persuasion rhetoric. By his own account, Trump seems to know what he's doing. I play to people's fantasies, Trump says in The Art of the Deal. That's why a little hyperbole never hurts. I call it truthful hyperbole. It's an innocent form of exaggeration and a very effective form of promotion. According to Adams, even at his most blustery, Trump has a strategy, one that should not be underestimated. He is a master manipulator of the media and of people's minds. And I think this is part of the thing. A lot of Trump's haters, myself included, wrote him off at the beginning. We said, that guy is ridiculous. There's no way people are going to vote for him. But back in 2016, I had done no research on cults. I had just barely discovered the anti-MLM movement. This was a different time. I think we're bringing a lot more light to these movements and what's going on now. And knowing that Trump is intentionally using hyperbole, is intentionally making as much noise and trying to repeat things that people will remember as much as possible, kind of shows that it's pretty likely that he was intentionally trying to manipulate people to side with him, even when the stuff he was saying was utterly obnoxious and ridiculous. And the media absolutely ate this up, because, like I said, in an era where we're existing online and existing with the TV and all of that, our attention is the product which media companies are selling to advertisers. So if they can keep our attention, that is all they need to do. That is the number one thing. On page 121, we get this. Trump is perpetually campaigning, kicking up political dust, creating crises. It's all good business and not just for Fox. As Les Moonves, not sure if I'm saying that right, former president of CBS, famously said, Trump's candidacy may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS. The same could be said of cable networks like CNN and MSNBC. So yeah, Trump just acted obnoxious until the media covered him nonstop and he was living rent-free in all of our heads. That's how he did it. That's how he led a cult. And part of the problem with this is that media companies are owned in essentially an oligopoly. They're not quite a monopoly because we do have a couple companies that are competing with each other and it's not just one at the very top controlling everything. But because everything is owned by so few companies, everything is owned by something else, and then everything has to answer to someone else, and we can't just put out whatever we want. Like I said earlier, I'm worried about this video getting demonetized because I don't own YouTube. YouTube owns YouTube. Google owns YouTube. All of that. So if I say things on here that could get me demonetized, that is going to affect my income, and that might in some ways incentivize me not to say them. Not in this case, because this is important to talk about, and also thank you again to my sponsor, the Gray and Gold Podcast, linked in the description below. So let's take a look at page 137, which says, today, more than 90% of all media in the United States is owned by just 6 companies. Clear Channel Communications owns more than 1,000 radio stations, and the Sinclair Broadcasting Group owns almost 500 local channels. This consolidation was made possible by the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which eliminated regulations on ownership that had been in place since 1934, which allowed for anyone to enter any communications business to let any communications business compete in any market against any other. A blatant example of corporate influence is the Sinclair Broadcast Group. Among their hundreds of stations are many local ABC, CBS, and Fox affiliates. In early 2018, the company faced harsh criticism when it required local broadcasters to read from a company-generated script decrying the danger that mainstream media outlets and false news pose to democracy. Timothy Burke, a video director at Deadspin, clipped together recordings of the announcers reading, in near unison, the mandated script, often without a trace of irony. The video went viral and quickly led to widespread criticism. Former news anchor Dan Rather commented, news anchors looking into the camera and reading a script handed down by a corporate overlord, words meant to obscure the truth, not elucidate it, isn't journalism, it's propaganda, it's Orwellian. A slippery slope to how despots wrest power, silence dissent, and oppress the masses. Trump, evidently noting his own positive coverage by Sinclair, responded to the scandal, so funny to watch fake news networks among the most dishonest groups of people I've ever dealt with criticize Sinclair Broadcasting for being biased. Sinclair is far superior to CNN and even more fake NBC, which is a total joke. In March 2019, conservative Nexstar Media Group purchased Tribune Media in a $6.4 billion transaction, making it the single largest television group in the United States. Y'all, corporations influence everything. It's wild. And combining the facts that Trump is gaining from all of this corporate influence because he's profitable and he gets all of the media attention, combining that with his history with multi-level marketing groups and with cults, it's not surprising that he is using these same tactics that MLMs use to sell himself to the people. And another technique that both Trump and MLMs use is the relatability factor. I've talked about this in books by female boss babes versus male boss bros, how you'll see someone like Rachel Hollis come out and be like, I'm just like you, I'm a working mom. Ladies, isn't pregnancy difficult? It hurts so much when you push a baby out of your vagina. Also, I'm a working mom. Doesn't it suck when we're discriminated against? And she'll try to be relatable, but then you realize that she's a millionaire who has a nanny and is not on the same playing field. You see the same thing with Grant Cardone, where he comes in like, hey bros, I used to be just like you. I got beat up by the football team every day after school and girls didn't like me, but now I'm able to stalk women into marrying me because I invested in real estate. And it's like, whoa, this relatability factor of people who are completely outside of our realm of existence is wild, and Trump is using it just the same as everyone else. Like I said, he's a business guru. So on page 125, in this part, Hassan is referencing a book called The Fine Art of Propaganda, and he's breaking down different types of propaganda and how different cult leaders or business guru types will use these to appeal to the masses. One of them is called plain folks. This occurs when a speaker attempts to persuade his audience that their ideas are good by claiming that he or she is just like them, of the people, plain folk. Trump is a brash billionaire who has nonetheless fostered a sense of identification with his audience by promoting an outsider, non-politician image and by mirroring their issues and emotions, taking their struggles, for example, the closing of coal mines, as his own cause. Just like business gurus and MLMs do. So I think it's become pretty clear how Trump has been able to manipulate a base of supporters into voting for him, into fighting for him, into believing whatever he says, even when he has no evidence, because he's using cult techniques. And I know a lot of my viewers don't like Trump overall. This next section of the video is going to get a little weird and a little controversial, but I ask you to stay with me, and because I'm not a cult leader, if you disagree with me, I welcome you to talk about it in the comments section below. That's what I liked about this book too. At the beginning, Stephen Hassan was like, if you disagree with me, that's totally fine. You should. And there were a few things in this I disagreed with him on, and that's totally fine because he's not my cult leader. Anyway, if you disagree with this, I welcome you to talk about it in the comments below, and even if you want to discuss it one-on-one in a video, like, I'm always open to that. Anyway, I know a lot of my viewers, like me, don't like Donald Trump. I've gotten a few comments from Trump supporters in the past talking about how they like him here and there, but overall I think the majority of my audience tends to lean more to the left than to the right, although there are some exceptions. So I imagine that the majority of you guys watching this right now probably don't think that you're a part of Trump's cult. But the more I've been thinking about this, the more I've come up with thesis. This is probably going to be controversial, but I don't think that Trump's supporters are the only ones who are in his cult. I think some of his dissenters are actually falling prey to his cult influence as well. So this next section of the video is going to be about how Trump's opponents and how people like you and me who hate Trump, or if you like Trump and you're watching this, again, I'm not saying that everyone who loves or hates Trump is in the cult, but I'm saying that I think a lot of Trump's opposition is in a cult too. So let's talk about a few of the most egregious examples of Trump's cult influence in this book, and then see if Trump's supporters are the only ones who have done this. On page 45 of this book, Trump also likes to boast about his personal power. A power so great that he could famously, quote, stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and still win votes. So this is an example, right, of how Trump's influence on his cult, his power is so strong that people would vote for him even if he did something that horrible. Now let's look at another example of where we've seen this. When I listen to people who have joined the Democratic Party, and let me be clear, I don't register with political parties because I don't want to. I'm not loyal to any politician. I will vote for someone who is going to serve me and my community and my family and the people in my life and society at large who I think is going to serve the best interest. I do not vote based on party lines, and that's something I've been very open about, but I did vote for Joe Biden because I think Trump is horrible. Anyway, I've noticed that a lot of people who tend to side with leftist cause join the Democratic Party tend to do so because of things like income inequality. They believe that Republicans have not treated the poor well, that they have victim blamed people who have ended up in poverty. Also because of feminist issues sometimes, because we see Republicans enacting policies that can be oppressive to women, because often the Me Too movement was very involved in, when Brett Kavanaugh was going to get sworn into the Supreme Court, we saw the Me Too movement coming out there, and a lot of famous, people like Alyssa Milano, Democratic activists coming in to support that. With those things in mind, why are we seeing something like this? In 2020, Joe Biden was accused of sexual assault by a woman named Tara Reade. Is Biden guilty? I have no fucking idea. I'm not his lawyer. I don't know what happened. Nobody knows what happened. I am a believer in the Believe Women movement though, and I am giving her the benefit of the doubt and assume that based on what I've seen, it seems like she's been trying to get this story out for a while and has been silenced. However, I'm not going to straight up say I know for a fact that Joe Biden is a rapist, because I don't. And because I'm pretty sure Donald Trump is a rapist too, but I'm not going to say I know for a fact that he is. Again, I'm not going to accuse anyone of a crime on my channel. That's ridiculous. But I am going to say that women who have come out against Trump, against Kavanaugh, against Joe Biden, against Bill Clinton, I am giving them the benefit of the doubt and taking their stories seriously. With the Believe Women movement in mind, compare the following two statements. This very cult-like line of Trump could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and still win votes, with this. The problem is Trump. With the opponent being Trump, I don't care if Biden fisted that woman in the ass and pussy at the same damn time. Hope she enjoyed it, and if not, oh well, what the fuck is that? What the fuck is that? That is unacceptable. And then we have this tweet that we saw around the same time. I would vote for Biden if he raped 100 women at gunpoint. The stakes are high in this election. So we have people who are on the left, and one of the left's primary causes talk about is rights for women, equal rights for people of all demographics. Before Donald Trump, one of the main reasons that a lot of people hated the Republican Party was that the Republican Party didn't place a lot of importance on getting wealth and income equality in this country and didn't seem to care about the growing wealth gap. That was a major reason. So you would assume then that people who want to vote for the Democratic Party probably care about people not staying poor and not staying in poverty. There was this huge message for a while that Republicans were victim blaming people who ended up in poverty and claiming things like personal responsibility within a capitalist society. That's a message that's been going on for a while, and I'm not saying if it's good or bad, I'm just saying that that's what the message was. Then when Trump becomes the Republican nominee, we see things like this. An account on Instagram called Being Liberal which had a Biden-Harris 2020 profile picture, tweeted this picture that said, "The Bible Belt, also known as gay porn belt, divorce belt, teen pregnancy belt, meth belt, food stamp belt, welfare belt, poverty belt, low wage belt, HIV belt, and the STD belt." So cool, we're just gonna blame people in impoverished communities for their own problems now. So here's another tweet we found. Thousands of cars form lines to collect food in Texas. This was during the pandemic when people were struggling. And this person tweeted, "How many of these people voted for Trump?" So this person says, "Definitely all Trump supporters. Rednecks, hillbillies, no dental care trash. Those people thinking voting red makes them part of the elite. Yep, uneducated twats. That's why Trump used them. He knows that they are stupid enough for that crap. Poor America." And now we're going to answer the question. When it comes to cults on the left, who is the leader? When we look at these examples, when we see people throwing away their morals, whether that be feminism and believing women or fighting for income inequality and not victim blaming the poor, and they're throwing away these morals in favor of making a point against Trump, who's the cult leader? Is it Joe Biden? No, I honestly don't think that Joe Biden has it in him to run a cult. He's not a very memorable personality and his vision for the future is too fuzzy. In all of these cases, I would say the cult leader is still Trump. Trump has managed to have such a wide influence that even when people hate him, they still focus on him. Some of the people who oppose him have turned him into the only enemy. Now, when it comes down to goals and visions for a better future, if those goals conflict with disagreeing with Trump, they'll throw away their own morals for Trump's sake. It's for Trump's sake on the opposite side, but he's still the one at the center of everyone's thoughts. Every once in a while, Trump is going to say something that's true. Broken clock is right twice a day and all of that. And when Trump says something that is objectively true every once in a while, I don't just throw away all my own beliefs in favor of opposing him. I just put up that screenshot of the article from The Onion that says, "Heartbreaking, the worst person you know just made a great point." Because it happens. Trump also drinks water and breathes air. He also eats food and has a family. I'm not gonna start hating on all of those things too just because Trump does them. At some point it becomes ridiculous. At some point we have to ask ourselves if our own morals and goals are stronger than our love or hate for one particular person. And let me be clear, like I said, I did very reluctantly vote for Joe Biden because my priority is for our country to get some relief from this pandemic. And Trump has proven time and time again that he is incapable of providing that. But I'm still going to criticize Joe Biden for his crime bill. I'm still going to criticize Joe Biden for the way he's treated women and made them uncomfortable. I'm going to criticize him because having criticism for our leaders, even the ones we voted for, is healthy. Now, there has been a new issue that has just arisen within the past week, which is that Donald Trump has been banned off of Twitter along with many other social media platforms. The discussion comes up, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Is this a saving grace for America or a violation of free speech? Neither. Let's talk about it. First, I want to make it very clear that we cannot frame this argument in terms of what is and isn't free speech. As many people have pointed out, Twitter is not a guaranteed right by the Constitution. Twitter is a private company. What Twitter did, they are fully within their legal rights to do. This is not infringing on the First Amendment whatsoever. When you make that argument, it sounds stupid because it's not true. Now, that's not to say that whether Twitter should be a right or not, I don't have the answer to that. It's a philosophical question that we can talk about, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that Twitter did not violate any laws by doing that. So everyone out here who's a Trump simp, who's like, you know what, Twitter is infringing on free speech. No, Twitter is a privately owned company, and especially if you're a capitalist who believes in private companies being able to do whatever the fuck they want, then literally you asked for this. But that doesn't mean that we can't discuss the pros and cons of what happened. Do I think that America's gonna be better off for Trump being banned on Twitter? I honestly don't know. I'm actually worried that this ban could potentially make his cult stronger by making him appear to be a martyr, by making him appear to be oppressed in some way, by being able to frame himself that way to a group of people who will already believe whatever he says. And not only that, by increasing the information control within his cult.
What do you think about Trump getting banned on Twitter?
I think it's a double-edged sword.
Same! Okay, good. I'm glad we have the same opinion on this, because I was like, most people I know think it's objectively good, and then I see a few people thinking it's objectively bad, and I'm like, there's a lot to unpack here.
I think that it's good in the sense that a lot of the way that he's been able to radicalize people has been through social media.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, by taking down his Twitter and Facebook, I think, right, they banned him as well.
Facebook too, yeah.
You're essentially making him a martyr in his followers' eyes, which will only push people further into his cult. So yes. I think it's definitely a double-edged sword.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely some benefit to it because he was, inciting a lot of violence. He was using that to reach people and polarize them. However, he can still do that without social media, but now it's going to be without his dissenters. So, like, if you used to go on Trump's Twitter, over half of the replies would always be people disagreeing with him and telling him he's wrong. I mean, some people more eloquently than others, but regardless, there would be a mix of some people would agree with him and a lot of people would disagree with him and try to disprove him. So at the very least, even if his supporters weren't going to agree with the people who were trying to argue with him, at least they saw that information, at least they saw that viewpoint existed. Whereas now, if Trump and his followers communicate, I don't know, just through email newsletters, or I know the app Parler got taken off the App Store, but like the app can still exist even if it's not on the App Store. Like it still can exist as an app. So like even those things that exist, like now it's more of an echo chamber of just people who already agree with each other, and Trump can now basically tell his followers that the other side or the radical left or whoever is doing whatever crazy thing, rather than getting to see what they're actually doing, because now they're in more of an echo chamber than before. And I think that just makes the cult stronger and it makes it worse. So I think it's like part of me's like, yeah, I'm glad that he's not reaching all of these people all the time, but also like he's still the president and like he like for another week, I guess. But it's like, yeah, I think that to an extent, like this could end up making the cult elements a whole lot worse.
Yeah, and I think it will be interesting to see what happens like with the whole impeachment. If he, as far as I understand, if he's like taken from office, then he won't be able to run in 2024. Is that correct?
I'm pretty sure, yeah, and I hope that happens because
I
don't want him to run again.
Yeah, that's what I hope that happens too. But if that doesn't happen, I think he's going to keep his core followers for the next 4 years, and we might be just seeing the same thing happen again 4 years from now.
So the final question I want to ask, are political parties cults? Honestly, yes, I think they are. I don't necessarily think that every single political party ever is most definitely a cult. I don't think that every person who has ever registered with a party is a cult member. No. But I do think they are susceptible to cult tactics. And this isn't an issue of right-wing versus left-wing. This is an issue of, under the right circumstances, most of us would be able to join a cult. Most of us would be susceptible to that. And no, I don't personally think that Joe Biden is a cult leader. I don't think that people are as loyal to him in that way. But I do think that the Democratic Party as a whole, as well as the Republican Party, I think that both of them need to be very careful with how they manipulate information and how they encourage people to only seek information from certain sources. Like I've said in the past, you should be able to read something you disagree with and tell that source why you disagree with it. You should be able to listen to someone say something wrong and tell them why they're wrong. But cutting yourself off from any source of information just makes you unaware that it even exists. So how do we solve this issue? I don't know. I wish I knew how to solve it, otherwise I would have done it already. Hopefully my video helps a little bit by getting the word out there about it. Personally, I think one way to solve this issue would be for every state to instate ranked choice voting policies for both local and national elections, because if we have ranked choice voting, people aren't going to feel like they have to vote for the lesser of two evils and then end up throwing away their own personal morality in order to do so, just so they can try to stop an even greater evil from happening. I think that that's going to be a start. On top of that, I think there needs to be limits on how much any individual human or corporation is allowed to fund a politician. I like some of the proposals I've seen in the past about how maybe every person gets like $1,000 grant and they can donate that to whatever campaigns they want throughout the year from a certain account, and then no more money can go in or out. That's not possible. And that no one can ever do that with business account money and things like that. I think that might be a good solution too, because when everything is based on what's going to generate the most revenue, we end up with people who are able to bring in the big ratings, who are able to do things like a cult leader would. And to be fair, I don't think that Trump is the only cult leader in Washington whatsoever. But this video, I primarily focused on him because I read a book about him, because I had the most evidence and the most connections that I could draw. I would love to do more videos about this topic in the future if people are interested. Please let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comments below. Again, thank you so much to the Gray and Gold podcast for sponsoring this video. Check out their podcast linked in the description below. Check out my Patreon supporters linked in the description below. And leave me a comment letting me know your thoughts on what's happening and what some potential solutions might be to get our country moving forward again and get people, I guess, able to think individually and try to work towards a goal that's going to create more equality for everyone. Because I think at most of our core, again, this is outside of people who are truly evil. There are evil people out there, yes. But I think the average American person, and the average person really in any country, just kind of wants to live their life and have the best possible life for themselves and their family. And when someone comes in to exploit that, the results can be absolutely disastrous. So let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and this is a really important discussion we need to have. I will see you guys again on Monday. In the meantime, don't forget to support small businesses, and don't forget to stay informed on what's going on in your country. Bye, friends.
Get you some nuts.
There was lots of memes.
Makes me wonder if I should take up lesbianism.
Chicago.
You guys asked for it.